Okay. You need to pay your mortgage off, dude.
In a prior video, I discussed my frustration with financial gurus often giving the same advice to everyone without considering their specific situation. Which, alright, they're taking phone calls, they're giving quick advice, I get it. I showed the baseline back of the napkin math on the opportunity cost of paying off a 3.5% mortgage with stock market investments that, in Dave Ramsey's own words, if left alone, would average around 10% annually. Now, I'm going to dive deeper and get a little bit more nuanced to show you how I have looked at the full picture with clients to help them decide, and hopefully this will provide you with a little bit more context on how to view this decision for you. First, there is an emotional part of this decision. I've discussed mortgaging and investing versus paying cash for a house with people before, and for some people, the numbers do not matter. There could be religious reasons, prior experiences with that, as Dave Ramsey himself has talked about, the makeup of just your money psychology. If a mortgage gives you the feeling of a constant hang over your head, even if it's at, say, 2%, but you can afford to pay it off, and that's the decision that you ultimately end up making, that's fine. But I think it's worth making that decision, having everything considered. In a second, I'm going to show you a quick clip of the baseline opportunity cost math that I did in a prior video. And on the other side, we'll look at the two other considerations for calculating the opportunity cost and how those should be considered individually to your specific situation. This includes how the freed up cash flow from not having a mortgage makes an impact, as well as the tax consequences of selling the investments might impact. Let's look at the opportunity cost of this. So let's take the $235,000 that's invested, according to Dave's math, is going to grow 10% each year. And so let's assume that 10% growth over 15 years. The future value of that $235,000 is $981,653. Now the cost of the mortgage in that time, because we have to keep that into consideration. So the mortgage is $235,000, an annual interest rate of 3.5% over a 15-year term. I'm calculating over the lifetime of that term, of that mortgage, you're gonna spend about $302,395. So let's compare the future value of that investment to the mortgage cost, and the difference is about $679,000. All right, again, a baseline back of the napkin math shows you're potentially leaving $600,000 plus on the table. But with that, you do have the monthly mortgage amount in additional cash flow. Now, we're looking at the opportunity cost of the investment. So if that additional cash flow is 100% used for an increased lifestyle spending, that will not change the opportunity cost math, but it is something to consider, if that is a goal in your plan especially. Now, some would argue that you should consider that monthly mortgage cost as being invested at 10% each month for the next 15 years. Now, I push back on that. It again depends on the person, but when someone pays off a mortgage, do they typically take the exact same amount that they were being forced to pay monthly to go towards that mortgage and investing it in, say, an S&P 500 fund every single month for 15 years or 180 months with no wavering whatsoever? I see this as very unlikely. But I could see an example where someone who is a diligent planner and saver might originally commit to that 100%, and it probably ends up somewhere in between 0 and 100% by the end of that 180 months. I would talk this through with someone and err a little on the lower side, knowing that psychologically it's tougher to put this money aside every single month when it's not forced like a mortgage is. So I'm going to take 50% of the monthly mortgage cost using the same situation from the first video. So we're looking at $235,000 at 3.5% paid off in 15 years. That gives us a $1,680 of monthly cash flow that no longer goes to the mortgage if the mortgage is paid off. 50% of that, so $840 is invested every month for 180 months. Assuming the same 10% annual return and no wavering, that'll give you roughly $317,000 of that opportunity cost back. So now we're looking at around $362,000 of opportunity costs. I personally think it's ambitious to assume over 50% is going to be reinvested without wavering for 180 months. And maybe for your sake, 25% makes more sense. But again, this is personalized. If you're super certain that you'll invest the equivalence of the mortgage payment for 180 months, then more power to you. Next, the tax consequences. This is going to range quite drastically depending on your personal situation. Now, let's look at a realistic example for Joe from Milwaukee, the original caller to Dave Ramsey in this case. He said he has around $900K in a taxable brokerage account. He's 45, assuming he wouldn't be touching his IRA funds. He would pull from the taxable brokerage account. He said he started in 2015 putting $1,000 a month into an S&P 500 fund. First off, kudos to Joe. I'm going to assume, just running some rough estimates, that selling $235,000 from the brokerage account would result in roughly, or let me put it this way, you would have to sell $244,000 to net $235,000 after taxes. So there's about a $9,000 tax consequence to raising the $235,000 to pay off the mortgage. So that original $235,000 number would need to be adjusted to $244,000, which will show more favorable towards keeping the mortgage funds invested. Now, you can get lost in analysis paralysis at this point. For example, I tend to be personally a little bit more conservative than assuming a portfolio will return on average 10% each year. But the point of this exercise that I go through with clients is to give them a rough idea. The math changes drastically when you're looking at, for example, a 3.5% mortgage versus a 6.5% mortgage. Now, after walking through this example, using the assumptions that make sense for an individual, I pair that with the emotional feelings that we discussed as well. And that should allow you to make an informed decision that considers the numbers and your emotional feelings towards debt and how you should proceed. Thank you for listening. Hit subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. I have a 5-part series starting next week. I think you'll enjoy it. And as always, money is a tool, knowledge is freedom, and planning is power. See you next week. Hope you have a great rest of your day.